What's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. And also welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. My name is Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest game chat with Matt Leacock and Rob Daviau, part 2 of the Legacy Convention conversation. We talked about the state of Legacy previously on part 1. Go ahead and check out my YouTube channel, Shelf Stories, as well as the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast for that. And then part 2 is now, where we will be talking about Pandemic Legacy 1, 2, and 0 in that order. There are pretty significant spoilers, especially for 1 and 2. Those games have been out. 1 has been out, a fair amount of time right now. We're going on 6-7 years at this point, and then 2 shortly thereafter. Light spoilers for 0 because I imagine there's a lot of people out there who've gotten through 1 and 2 but have not gotten through 0, so we're pretty light on the spoilers for Season 0. But, and as this will be reminded in the show as well, the spoilers will be hot and heavy for Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and Season 2, so you have your spoiler warning. Without further ado, on to the show. All right, so we are back with Matt Leacock and Rob Daviau. We talked about Legacy and kind of, the evolution of the concept. It's the beginning of it and what it means now and kind of, how it's evolved and how, moving forward and all that kind of thing. So it's really good to look at, touch base with, where Legacy is. Let's talk about Pandemic Legacy. That's what people want to know in terms of like the actual experience at the table. So I want to go through all of them. I've played all of them and it is going to be fairly spoilerific. I mean, it's been how long it's been since Pandemic Legacy? It's been about 8 years, 8 years?
No, 6 years.
6 years. Okay.
6 years since the first one, 1 year since the last one. But yeah, as long as we say right now, we're going to talk about some things that if you haven't played it.
Right. Or if you don't care, there are plenty of people who just okay, wait.
Yeah. So if you don't care or you never plan on playing them or you're the person who likes spoilers, welcome.
Or you like to read the end of the mystery novel before you read the book?
Or read Alan Sepinwall's review of something before you actually watch the show?
Sure. If I'm watching a reality show and I get really invested or something like that, often before the finale, I'll go online and be like, okay, they won. And then I actually enjoy that last episode knowing the ending.
Mm-hmm. They let you look at stuff more. So yeah, we are going to get into, I won't I think story spoilers might be, a thing, but I will get into some twists because there's definitely stuff that happened, especially in 1. And then we can kind of go on from there. So just spoiler warning, everybody can get to know that. Okay. So Pandemic Legacy Season 1 did the bomb, right? This was the bomb. This was the one that just really blew up, top of the charts within months. I mean, this was not, I think it was because it was a New Year's thing, right? Like it was released in the fall and then
released in
October.
And 2.5 months later on January 1st, it was number 1.
Boom.
Yeah.
Who knew, right?
Not us.
Right. But there is looking back, right? Hindsight, there are elements that said, okay, wow, the gaming verse was definitely ready for this, so to speak. So I have heard Pandemic Legacy Season 1 be compared to 24 or the A-Team or, the Avengers or something like that, where it's this really heroic, okay, we are there's very little moral ambiguity. We are the good guys. And, we're kind of, flying through. There's a little bit of it, because there's shifting loyalties and all that kind of thing. But I'm still the active agent and I'm doing all things. And, when I realize what the twist and then when I realize what I'm doing, I have the choice if I'm going to be this, that, or third thing. I felt like a hero, right? Was that the, how early in the process was that decision to be okay, we're going to treat this that kind of action movie?
I don't think we ever discussed not being the hero.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of inherent in the base game to a large extent. If you look at the cover, it looks like some sort of movie poster of a heroic team. So I think it's kind of in the DNA of the brand to some extent.
I guess there's because there's certain types of heroes and there's different ways of telling the story. This was very like I said before, action movie-esque.
It was we wanted to be a summer blockbuster action movie. When we sort of picked a genre at some point we were talking this is just a summer popcorn action movie. The science doesn't have to make perfect sense, although we'll try to give it. It has to make movie sense. Right. Yeah. You have to have a couple sentences. You have to have a couple sentences in the middle. Right. Where we did some homework and we talked to people and here's where it is, where this was not peer reviewed and should not be used as sort of, a documentary.
Right.
But no, we very much wanted the summer blockbuster and leaned into the tropes. Like in February, you start having relationships with people. We wanted to have like, oh no, who's that? It's my ex-wife. You know, like that part in the movie, like where they come in, you're like, oh no. And then you have these sort of different relationships with each other. And in all three of these, we ended up really coming up with the first act and then the end. And then narratively, and we would work towards the middle. This is our first time doing it, so it was a little like panicky. Like, didn't have like July through October really narratively.
Well, for the first one, we didn't even know it would play out over a year. You know,
we didn't know. Like once we
didn't have a structure. So, but yeah.
Once we figured out it was 12 months, and sometimes you repeat them, and sometimes you don't. We start talking about 3 acts, and if you played the game, April is when we go from the disease being abstract to the disease being personified in little figures. The faded, and it's like now there's figures on the board. So that was our first like, oh, this has changed, and we couldn't figure out like what changes it. Where suddenly, yes, we want you to get to vaccines at the end, and yes, we want to be administering vaccines. We just assumed at the time that everyone would want a vaccine. But like what
uptweet,
what narratively, why, like what changes? Why, how is it just not like X, Y, Z, it just keeps going. And Captain America, the Winter Soldier had come out, and we were sitting over a bowl of noodles, weren't we?
Yeah, over at Phonam, having some.
And we were having lunch. We were talking about it, and we're like, "What if you're actually working for the bad guys and you don't know it?" And we're like, "Oh, hello!" Like the Hydra has infiltrated Shield, and we're like, "Wow, what if?" And then that's really where the whole thing of Zodiac came out, and this organization and being manipulated. And then we went back and rewrote all the narrative cards at the beginning to be a little more sinister, fun, if you know how to read them. And then that just sort of came together from there.
And I noticed that, and then taking the extra mechanical step, because I'm interested in that, how mechanisms kind of integrate. Because as you probably have figured out, not a lot of people read all the flavor text. That gets a little bit, from group to group, that varies. Mechanism wise, though, in terms of investing the characters in building those government outposts, and then like, kind of encouraging that is like, okay, here's a goal, or here's a good thing that you could do with those government outposts. And then like at the reveal, that 2/3 reveal, it's like, oh, by the way, this is bad. You need to deconstruct these government outposts.
Yeah, we wanted something that was obvious in hindsight. Like the paramilitary comes in like in May or something. It's like, we got this. We need to build military outposts. We need to get the population under control. And we've got a situation. How many times in a movie are they the good guys?
Right.
Here's your drone escort that can actually wipe out infected people as you leave a city. It's like, is that really good? Do you really want to take that?
And so we wanted it to be like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense, right? How many, like we wanted you to just be like, of course they're the bad guys. And some people would even make a joke like, well, I'm sure these people are going to be good news. But you get so fixated on the goals to win that you go, yeah, it'll be fine. The designers told us it was fine.
You get fixated in the mechanisms. Like they help me do the game, like that the one upgrade where like, I think, was that the upgrade? Like, every time I leave a city, I kill a faded, that was the one upgrade that determined.
That was the candy right there.
That was the candy that basically said
on the trap. Yeah.
If you're willing to be the person who took this upgrade, which is I shoot civilians remotely as I leave a city, you're probably working for the bad guys.
It was so good mechanism wise.
And then we made it really, really good.
Totally on purpose. That's what created the emotional connection. And then the big twist that everybody remembers. And what I find is, and maybe you can comment on this, I don't know that many people who remember the plot 6-7 years on, but like all the different things, the characters and everything, but they remember the moments. And that particular moment is like that whoever had that sticker, whoever or whatever, like they were vested their character or the killing machine and they lost it. They remember that. Did you find that in terms of like not as close on the plot so much, but like remembering the moments?
Oh yeah. I remember watching. So I watched my wife's group play the game, and the person who had that upgrade immediately grabbed their character card and stuck it in their back pocket so that it would not be destroyed. And it's probably still on the refrigerator. I guess they just refused to rip it up. I mean, they played along with the game and all that, but
sure.
there was a lot of connection there. Then I think that was sort of the peak for that season.
Yeah, and I think that was the most personal we got with people, because people do bond with characters.
Yeah.
And so actually asking you to get rid of a character 2/3 the way through, I think, was the most dramatic thing we did. And just talking about being conservative, in the future ones, we're like, that was a lot. We don't need to do that again.
Right. I was going to ask
like
that.
if you're like, okay, we pushed it, and we just actually we don't need to do that. We don't ask you need to do any more than that, and the trick's done. And so we didn't do that again. But I've had people come up to me at conventions and just go, September. Thanks for playing.
I guess was that a thought? I mean, like, just to drill down on it a little bit. I mean, it was so memorable and so cool. Yeah, okay, cool. Like if it wasn't you, and if it wasn't, but just cool for the game. None of the other games had that kind of thing,
right?
None of the other games played with loss in that way, or like. I'll say it that way. Like, I mean, I think Pandemic Legacy Season 1 leaned into loss harder than the other two games.
It's the only one that takes place in the current world, or the current world for 2015, where pandemics were fictional.
Right.
So you can put yourself there. You can put yourself in these cities. You know what it's like. It's like, it's today, it's now, it's outside your window. And I think that there's a personal connection to that. Talking about things that you do and then you don't realize how people are going to play, and in retrospect it seems obvious. We gave you an array of characters to choose from so that you could build your best team for that month. Like, oh, we should really take the general and then the scientist. Like, what's our best people? Like that, your coaches, and you're going to take people off the bench. So when one of them turns out to be a traitor, you're like, okay, well, that person's gone. Not realizing how many people would just pick a character and play that character, even if they were the wrong character for that month, that people weren't going to use it. They were going to play it like D&D, like, this is me, this is my character, this is my name, don't play this character, I don't care if it doesn't work for this month, this is who I am. So I think it hit harder than we had planned, because we planned on that. You lost one of your team members went away, not you as a character were killed. Right. So it punched harder than we meant for it to do, but I don't think that was a bad thing.
Yeah, man.
Oh, no, I just agree with that. Yeah. I mean, we were thinking that you'd be pulling people off the bench and then trying to min-max and try to figure out the best way to play each month by month. And that was one thing we learned from season 1, is just how strong a connection you make with your character. And so I think we took other strategies in season 2 and season 0, especially in season 0, where rather than swapping out characters, your character goes deeper, right? So.
Amazing. Yeah. I'll get to that. I'll absolutely get to that. I love that, because I had to name them, and that's psychological, right? Once I name something, now it's mine. Right? They've done the story. They've done the study like a million times, like, mechanical, like a room full of mechanical dinosaurs, like something that you would never ever have a attachment to. You put a control group and just like play with them, and then another group, you name your dinosaurs. Now all of a sudden there's like, oh, I don't want to give it up, I don't want to do this. And from the very beginning, you named your characters. And not only that, you pulled the trick of like giving us relationships and giving us if this person is with this person. So it's almost like, it's funny to hear you say, I didn't anticipate how attached people got, but there was so many things that y'all did to create, that sense of, like, this is mine.
Yeah.
As you mean,
we didn't get it all right or wrong. We didn't predict exactly what that people were going to do. We weren't sure people were going to bond with the story. We knew the power of naming.
Right.
I mean, I do that all the time. It drives my wife nuts, because I'll be like cooking and I'll be like, oh, look, one escaped. I'm like, sorry, Mr. Zucchini. What, Larry? I don't care what your name is. I don't care that you have a wife and kid. And I put it in the pan, and she's like, you monster. And I go, it's just a zucchini. I gave it a little backstory for 5 seconds. And, but we also, it's like, how much were they going to play it as a story? And to your point, how much were they going to play the mechanics? And if you're completely min-maxing, you could name it. You could say like, hey, sorry, General. Sorry, Tom. You're off. You're sitting at this one out. I'm going to play this person. And then you just swap and you have a different character. Turns out that most people just when it came to characters, went for story over optimization.
And from pandemic perspective, I think it's like, not only do I get attached because I named it, I get attached to the play style. Like, I'm a dispatcher guy. I don't care. Well, give me a dispatcher and I'm happy. And thank you for giving me a version of dispatcher, mixing it up a little bit, but thank you for giving me a version of that, all three. And so it's like, I get so used to that play style just on a mechanism level that I feel like even though this character might have been a little bit better for this particular thing because they quarantined or because of whatever, I'm so much better. I think so much better in terms of the geometry of the game when I'm this character. Was that something that also came up during, as you observing people play?
I think that's something that's been clearer and clearer in retrospect. I mean, I've talked with Tom Lehman about this quite a bit when we're talking about designing roles for Pandemic and how you want to have different abilities that meet different personality types. So you liking the dispatcher might mean that you're really into creative solutions, like puzzle solving, where someone else might be really into efficiency, or someone else might want just a really big effect, or other people just like the great feeling of cleaning things or things like that.
I like seeing the whole board. I like just kind of mapping stuff out.
It's great to be able to give a different type of ability, different types of people that really resonates with them and makes it. Or another one is like the researcher just being really helpful. I get to help you, I get to help you, I get to help you as a play style. So it's great to be able to have an array of roles and characters that kind of fill those niches for people.
Great. So like in terms of the investment character, that it paid off in that one September. In terms of that,
you got it. You did it right.
I did September. And then to the end, to elaborate a little bit more on the idea that like you didn't know the way you ended season 1 was closed. Or like, like this is the 12 story, this is our way to tell. There wasn't necessarily kind of like, plot leads to the next to season 2.
Yep.
Right. I don't see. It's funny because I don't really remember what happened at the end. Do you remember at the end of season 1? Like I know we kind of like did the Avengers thing, we saved the day and all that kind of thing. But I really don't remember
something which you go to the CDC and there is a backup of Coda hidden in a vault. So you blow it up. They have a storage vault with highly, highly deadly diseases, and you just blow it up.
Right. Okay, blow up, I remember.
It's not smart. Right? Like this is basically like a really high security lab with really bad things. You're like, blow it up. And so we were sort of joking about how that makes no sense as a way to deal with a biohazard. Like, well, what would happen? We're like, well, you probably launched something else that was even worse. That probably wasn't the only thing stored there. And that's what gave us the opening to season 2.
Got it.
Yeah. We had long discussions, I think, though, about whether the effects of your season 1 game would affect season 2, right? Would we have any linking between the two? And ultimately decided that was kind of a dead end. Because you got people who have not played it, you got people who have played it multiple times, et cetera, et cetera. So that's
people don't really remember it. People
don't remember it. It just felt like there was way more problems than opened up interesting.
So we get to season 2. And season 2 is a future story, kind of apocalypse scenario, beginning with that one little island, right? One little island. You only have a couple of cities, and then over the course of the game, you're kind of unveiling stuff. And I know you've talked about this many times, a couple of times. So we could just kind of go over that ground here about the decision to just kind of like take 2 and just, we could do this again. We could do the Avengers again and like be cool. And like everybody would love it, but really deciding that you wanted to do something completely different, for season 2.
Yeah, well, we did because we felt like all the ideas that we had for the summer blockbuster, we did. And so we were just going to be doing another summer blockbuster. And also keep in mind that we started season 2 6 months before season 1 came out.
Oh,
so we had no idea how it was going to be received. And it might have come out and done poorly. And the publisher would have said, oh, you guys can stop on 2. Right. So we had to make these decisions well before we knew how it was going to be received. So which is good because by the time 1 took off, we were halfway done 2.
Yeah, I wouldn't have liked that additional pressure.
I would know.
I know this is a hindsight thing, but do you think that would have changed the trajectory of how 2 was made? Would there have been either internal?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I don't know. Like, I like 2. 2 might be my favorite one, but I know that it doesn't necessarily. It's not most people's favorite one. Well, also you really do have to read the italicized flavor text in that one to play well. I think narratively it's interesting. I love the idea that you start and the world is almost gone and you have to push light back in. I'm a big D&D player. Like, here's a blank world. Go find stuff. Go over the hill. Go on an adventure with Gandalf, right? Like, what's behind here? And you get to draw your own connections to cities. It has the most customization of any of them. Like, when you take cards out, you put cards in, you can really make that game look nothing like anyone else's game. And I just think that's a wonderful sort of sandbox for people to play in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to use. I think that's what we're really chasing, is this idea that here's the world, go play with it, go make it yours, draw in the roots, look where poke in the dark corners you want to look in.
Yeah.
But it had a much wider cone of possibilities. We moved the guardrails out a bit. And so some people were over here doing a little bit better, and some people are over here doing a little bit worse. And so
just
a wider experience.
I'm interested in that because I remember, so what happened was what a lot of gamers went through. So like the games are longer, because there is more to do. There are more decisions, and the deck got really big. I remember towards the end, the deck, that the pandemic deck, like the turn by turn decks, like this. And so we went down a corner and we lost 4 games. We lost 2 games in March, 2 games in April. And I remember emailing you, Matt. I'm like, what are we doing wrong? And you gave me a line about the cone of possibilities. Like, okay, there's a really wide cone. It sounds like you went through down a road. And I don't know. Like, I mean, was it too, because so you mentioned before about the italicized text. Like if you had, in a way you kind of had to read in order to kind of know where you would go. Was that, could that have been done differently? Could there have been multiple ways to kind of keep the story going without those like blinding losses? Or or could the system not have handled multiple ways of like, being successful?
Well, I think when you look back and you say, if we had to redo them all again, a number of people have had 4 losses in a row in March and April there. And maybe they're just a little too hard.
Too tight. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like either a little too hard, or we didn't queue up in January and February enough that you really need to be doing forensic archaeology. Like we're giving you clues as to what happened between the end of 1 and the beginning of 2. And we're giving you dates and times. And it's a puzzle. It is a detective mystery of, well, what happened to the world? And you're getting flashbacks and you're putting it together. And maybe we didn't let people know, like, no, you need to be building this puzzle to play well. If you're just playing a game and going, and some stuff happened and here's a rule, then you're setting yourself up for a hard time, because the game is requiring you to fill in this backstory.
It's interesting because in a lot of games that the narrative text is just there for flavor, but if you almost have to explain that, hey, in this game, this stuff matters to some extent. Right?
I guess because it sounds like it's going at kind of cross purpose a little bit, because, it's, so we heard like, okay, go yonder, young man, the darkness abounds and you can kind of, add lots of possibility, but then by this third game, it's like, pay attention to everything, go here, not there. It's almost like a kind of a little bit of a cross purpose type thing. Am I reading that? Am I reading that right?
I think you're just actually still scarred a little from March and April.
It is my favorite. It is my favorite experience. Season 2. I will say that. I absolutely agree with you. Like in terms of the flexibility and the drawing stuff, it is my favorite experience. It's just, I guess, in terms of like that, in a way, it's like, okay, I want to be able to share this with people. It's like, okay, I love season 2. I mean, just to get into spoilers, like you have to find another haven. Yeah.
And it's the one off the Pacific. And there are like at least 2, probably 3, maybe even 4 different things that we tell you by March that there was a Pacific haven and the haven has been lost and we need to go find it.
Right.
And if you search any of the cities like on the western coast of the Americas, you get more like haven clues. And then until you eventually find it off of Lima.
Yeah, it was off of Lima.
I think, like you have to find it off of Lima. So like the clues were there. We were trying to say like, go find the other haven. But some people just didn't pick that up. And then later on, like I think at some point we find it for you or like we give it to you or something. They're like, well, how were we supposed to know? And then you go back and you look at the cards and like, I didn't read those. And it falls prey into a little bit of, well, it was 2 months between games. And I think we could have done I don't know. To me, that's exactly how I would have played a game. If you gave me flashbacks, I would have been like, hold on. All right. So here's what they're trying to tell us. Like, that's exactly how my brain works, but not everyone has the same brain. And I think we could have maybe done something about where to put your clues on a timeline, or remind people to look through your cards, or give them a different name or something.
It's not going to be successful for every group either, right? You can't have both this wider sandboxy thing and also expect everyone to kind of pick up on it, right?
I think that's the contradiction I'm trying to get at. It's like, okay, this was inviting to be a sandbox, and I think like there's an idea when you're playing a sandbox that like I can go different places and it'll work out. Like you mentioned before about being a D&D person, like the DM will take care of me. So to speak, if I go here, if I do this or whatever, there's obviously rails on that, but like, if I do something that's relatively sensible, that isn't based on flashbacks or whatever, like the DM will take care of me.
Jason, and that's what take care of you. You finished your campaign.
You finished.
We just had higher expectations of you.
Yeah. I mean, if the DM says there's a dragon in that tower and over here is a dragon killing sword, you can go anywhere you want.
Right. That would have been nice to have, though.
I just tell you, it's in there.
Right, it's in there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's about prioritizing.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, no, I see, like, once we got past that, and once, because you have the catch-up mechanism, right? And so, like, you've talked about this before. This is worth sharing. Each of the games had like an obvious open this in case you do badly. Type thing, and maybe talk a little bit about like the psychological role that played, like having that kind of box 8 or whatever that was.
Oh, that was a really big learning from the first season. Like, we had people who were despairing because they lose 2 or even certainly 3 games in a row, and feeling like, oh, the product is dead. Like I can't play this game anymore. Clearly, I've broken it. There's no way to recover. So by saying if you lose 4 games in a row, open this box, immediately what that does is anchor you. Like, losing 2 in a row it's bad, but it's not 4 in a row. Right. And if you lose 3 in a row, you're like, oh my God, that's horrible, but it's not 4 in a row. And also, hey, if we lose 4 in a row, we get to open our present. So that just changed the psychology dramatically in season 1 when we were doing our research on that one.
Yeah. And also a little bit because of production needs and a little bit because of psychology. One of the first things you do in season 1 is take the sticker that tells you when to open it and put it on box 8. So you're like, look at this. We've got you. Yeah. We're right here. Like, you're putting it on this. Do not forget this. And then
here's your crash pad. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's one of the first things. It's like, we have put this here.
Yeah, we opened our crash pad and I don't think we lost another game after that. So, I mean, that was pretty exciting because it was like the supplies, you have to put the supplies on things. So you get like all these extra supplies. So it's like, finally, I have all the extra supplies I need to put stuff on every city and get taken care of.
Yeah, it gets pretty tight because what we wanted, when you see the supplies running out from the beginning.
Like, how are we ever going to win?
How are we be able to do this? And then hopefully when you find that first haven, you're like, oh, when we find havens, they give us
supplies,
more supplies. And that's how we keep the numbers up. And we also saw in season 1, a lot of feedback was, I liked it, but it wasn't challenging enough. So we're like, okay, let's do a dark middle chapter. Let's do the Empire Strikes Back or whatever it is. And let's make you kind of despair a little bit. And maybe we just one of those games maybe could have been a little bit easier. So, because if people say they lost 4 in a row, I'm like, March, April. Were you playing 4 players?
Yes.
4 players is harder than 3 is harder than 2. So if someone says, well, I lost 4 in a row, March, April, 4-player game.
What ended up happening was I think it was in North America, we opened a lot of cities. And so we didn't have enough supplies to cover all the cities that we opened. It got to the point where we didn't, because I think it was like set up where you can take the supplies and put them on places to get the coverage. And we literally did not have enough supplies for the cities that we opened.
I see.
Yeah, that's one of the things is we gave you a sandbox. Like, you can connect the world, but can you feed it? Right. You're in charge now. You're these these sort of underlings on the havens, and you're the people in charge, the boss who know what they're doing. They leave. And you're like, okay, we're in charge. So let's just save the world. And it's like, well, now we can't give supplies to everyone. But if we don't connect it, then like, we're not like, what's happening to them? And we really wanted that situation of being promoted from, way above what you'd be expected to do in over your head, and then getting mastery over the course of the game. And sometimes you have to say, like, just in season 1, you had to quarantine a city. You're like, we're leaving you to die for the greater good of the world. We're not connecting you, Chicago. because we can't afford right now to take care of you, but we'll try to get to you. And we wanted people to be like, not in a horrible way, but like, that doesn't feel good. We can do better than this, and sort of grow and learn how to like build the world again.
Right. All right. So I do want to be mindful of time. So let's get to zero. Zero is the thing that, it hit right before the COVID pandemic hit.
No, it was actually last October.
Well, it was October. So I guess
we had gone through like the hard lockdown, and then summer was not quite a breather. And then we're ramping up into our fall curve, but vaccines were still like months away.
Right. It did hit like after the COVID lockdowns. Right. So then, just in general, in terms of the discussion about it and the reception of it, like, did you notice that fewer people were playing? Did you notice that fewer people were talking about it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can look at BGG and you can just look at the number of ratings and they just go down, but that will happen with any trilogy. But the jump from 2 to 3 is quite big, even though the ratings are good. And it's just the world, it's just 2020.
Right.
There was no convention to promote it. People weren't going over to each other's house. Some people ask me now, like, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say my wife Donna plays the game with her group, and we were getting ready to do that, and weren't able to play at all. So their first game will be this coming Sunday. So I will finally get to see the game played in person. So yeah, it's had an effect even.
Yeah, and I will talk to people, or people on Twitter will be like, man, I love season 1 and 2. When's 3 coming out? I'm like, it's called Zero. It came out a year ago. They're like, no way, I haven't heard of this. Right. Like, just, we've all had a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So, it's fairly consistently selling quarter after quarter. So it didn't have this huge thing and then come down. So I'm hoping it just does this sort of slow build as the world opens up again. And we're not too far from the 10-year anniversary of season 1. So maybe there'll be some marketing push to as a trilogy. Like, I don't particularly know. But yeah, no, it was a tough time to put something out. And I think it had planned on being out earlier. And then COVID hit. We're like, well, maybe not now.
Well, that happened to Hot Zone, right? The Hot Zone North America was supposed to hit like right in March or something of 2020.
Yeah, it was a difficult product to bring out, just because of its topic matter, right? We want to be really sensitive to what's going on around the world. It had been planned for years, and so when it finally did come out, it's like try to offer print and play and so on, just to build some ties with the community and say, hey, this is available. If you want to play it at home, you can just print it and play it, or we've got it out in the stores now. But want to make sure the story behind that was really well understood.
Absolutely. So getting back to Zero, it definitely felt like that. Like that conservatism was kind of hit it, and I don't want to say conservatism in a bad way, but like 2 had all this innovative stuff. And now for Zero, we are getting, back to here are cities, here's some, things on the board, even though they're different, they're soldiers, but there's things on the board to take care of them and all that kind of stuff. Was that a conscious decision to kind of like, okay, we're going to, make this a little bit, feel a little bit more familiar in terms of pandemic again?
I think it was more about really trying to put the story first to a large extent, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
halfway through 2, we're like, how many of these we're doing? We're like, okay, we got one more after. We said, what do you do after the end of the world? Is like people farming and just building the world. So like, let's do a prequel, which
you do Scythe.
Yeah, well, that's how these things got started. And we started talking about a Cold War thriller, and we got interested in the passports, where you don't take a different character, you take different aliases within your character. And we started talking about spy tropes, and we got really excited about that like not all cities are the same. It's easier to get into some cities than other cities. But yeah, we did everything wacky with the pandemic system we could in season 2, and there was no more wacky to go. And so like, let's find something that's not as similar to pandemic as the first one and not as out there from the second one, but find a different way to tell a story, which is really what we focused on with a chapter.
Yeah, it's sort of like we had this toolbox of solutions that we come up with from 1 and 2. And if we put this spy thriller first, how can we draw from that to tell a really tight story and introduce it? Introduce the things in a way that really backs that up, and try to make an immersive world in that regard, rather than, oh, here's this shiny new mechanism this month. It's more like, okay, well, let's really try to make this spy thriller work as best as we can with the tools that we have discovered over the past 2.
Right, and because this one only came out a year ago, and some people are still finding, I'm going to go largely spoiler free for the last one if we could.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I think just in terms of what I'm interested in most is like mechanism, like just overall kind of thought approach, because there's definitely things that there's a retrenchment in terms of like it feels more like Pandemic than season 2 did, but then there's things that were like lessons learned, right? In terms of delivering season 0, and I won't do story spoilers, stuff that you can get off the rule book.
yeah,
Right.
that's fine. I mean, I think what we said is spy movies aren't about black and white, they're about shades of gray. So we tried to basically say, how can we put you in a morally ambiguous place as many times as possible, even down to some of the mechanisms. Like in the first game, you either won the month or you lost the month. And now we have 3 different ratings in season 0. You can win it, you can lose it, or you can get a, good enough, I guess. Like you didn't mess it up entire. Yeah, you're adequate. Like which also stings. Partly because we wanted you to just know this is not a binary world you're living in. And, 12 to 24 games is a lot. It's like an average of 17 in the first 2 seasons. By doing this, we could pull the average to be like 14 and make it a little bit less of a commitment to some people who maybe have played season 1 and season 2.
And just keep moving the story forward and having a sense of momentum and so on, right? And continuity. Like if you, depending on whether you win or lost, the second game, if you fail completely, the second game does alter a little bit in season 0. So it's not like you're resetting the world back necessarily to where you began. So we do some tricks there as well.
Was that really strong feedback that, because the thing about Legacy became all these games I have to play, 12, and then we got a bunch of them: Clank Legacy, Rise of Queensdale, and a lot of different campaign games. Kickstarter really blew up with like a lot of campaigns and all that kind of thing. And like, you get this general kind of malaise on the gamer end of, here's another game, another investment. I don't want to play another investment of games. Did that feedback like come to you okay, we're going to respond to this, or was it more a sense of like, the story, we can shorten this up for the sake of the story?
It's a little of both.
A little of both, yeah.
Yeah, I had friends who are like, can you just make a 6-pack of Legacy games? Something I can play over a long weekend with friends. 12 is, like I've done it. I played a lot of these. And also to Matt's point, since we were putting story forward, like in the first game, the first 2, it doesn't make a ton of sense that you messed up and it's like, you just whoop, and then you go back to the middle of the month and you keep doing it. This, we have like characters and things are happening. And if you fail an objective, then there's a consequence and stuff. Like, well, how do you just then do the second half of the month the exact same way? And so we had to, it does branch, as he said, like if you fail, you read some stuff and you might get different objectives or do different things. We're like, well, that's a lot of extra work for us and narratively to writing, and this might be confusing to people. So why don't, if we put a middle ground, then most of the time you just play it once and you either aced it or did okay. And then 1 to 3 times, probably you'll get the second half of the month and see that it changes.
I think one other lesson learned in that your funding never goes completely to 0. So you hit 1 at a minimum. So you've always got some ability to respond to what's going on in the world by selecting an event card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if
and the adequate success being a thing that actually raises your funding. So like you can get that middle spot where it's like, because that's what to me that felt like, if you're really in a pinch, that's what was going to lose you your game, right? Winning your game is like how much those events you have, because they're so swinging, so powerful. So like having an adequate success where you didn't quite do something, but then your increases funding, that felt like it really, really shot you through. Like we finished in 12 games and we didn't, look back.
Right. And the thing is, if you win, you get a much better score at the end. Because we talked about that. It's like, why aren't people just going to kind of like be adequate the whole time? And it's like you can, and you'll go and you'll play 12 games. And if you never win one, your funding will go up. And then at the end, your score will really reflect the fact that you sort of middle of the road did. And maybe that was very enjoyable. Maybe you just want to do that. But if you're someone who's really focused on winning and getting the best score and doing really well, then you get many more points for actually winning the game. But the downside is you might push too hard and end up losing the game.
Right. So you can play for mastery, you can play just for the experience, and the design kind of serves both groups.
So I mentioned before in Pandemic Legacy Season 1 that there was a lot of playing with loss. It wasn't just with the character, it was also with the world. In Pandemic Legacy Season 1, you can have destroyed cities, right? There are cities where it's like you get the stuff happens, and it becomes either really painful to enter the city or you really can't enter the city at all. And season 0, again, without going into too specific spoilers, I feel like because it wasn't like that, right? It wasn't quite like that in that same way. The board was fairly kind of like things were available. Was that specific for a story perspective? Was that like the constraints of a prequel? Was that kind of in terms of leading into that more stable world? And do you wish you had a little bit, or do you wish that there was more room to kind of like play with loss a little bit more on the board?
Well, we want to do something different in each one. So the first one is present day, so you can make the world look however you make it, and we know no matter kind of what you do, season 2, there's been a follow-up disease and it's all fallen apart. Season 2, it's all fallen apart no matter what you did in season 1. But season 0 takes place in 1962, 1, 3, 2. The world didn't fall apart then. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't resolve in nuclear war. So we were bound by the fact that, this is a flashback. So there's certain things that we can't push as far, but it didn't feel like shucks, we can't make the world burn. It's like, cool, we did that. We did that in 1. In 2, it's already burned. So this, we're going to do something different. We want your focus on other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we found ways to amp it up that were informed by the story. So you've got cities that have high degrees of surveillance. So you can get a feeling like, oh, no matter where I go in Asia now, I'm going to be surveilled and it's going to be a real problem. I might blow my cover, etc. So how can I find a place where it's safe to hang out?
Right.
So we played with other things on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it felt like, because there was ways to deal with the surveillance, right? Like you had, stickers and items and stuff like that. Like you could always go there. You had a resource to go. In season 1, no go. And so I guess like, it definitely felt like, it was almost like, having a boiling pot. And in season 1, the pot was like boiling, splashing all over the place. And in season 3, it almost felt like everything was kind of at a simmer. Like it was hot. But like, it was manageable because I had something else in the game help me kind of still keep on going.
Right? Played very well. No, I made that because I've seen people who just get into a mess with surveillance or other things that come out and they feel like their board is a mess. But yeah, no, it's this was supposed to be a psychological spy thriller. Wasn't a big, in a summer blockbuster. The White House gets blown up, or Fenway Park gets destroyed by aliens, or some giant asteroid crashes in a tidal wave. Like we were going for like big spectacle, and this is more, who do you trust? What do you do? How do you get in and out? How do you stay quiet? Like we were trying to fit the genre of
who do you trust? Yeah.
Of spy stuff, because and that's kind of set up right in the prologue. Like, who do you trust? You meet a character and the character's like, don't trust anyone, including me.
Right.
And we were trying to get people to be like, well, who's telling us the truth, and what does that mean? And is there an objective truth? We watched a bunch of spy movies from the 60s, 3 Days of the Condor. And, when we were playing, we're like, is this Sean Connery Bond? Like, do we have a super laser? And for a while we did. And we're like, no, that's too silly. But this isn't also not a 800-page spy novel with intricate characters. Like, I think at some point there's a difference between the KGB and the GRU. And we had like all sorts of Soviet internal politics, and we're like, no, that's too far that way. And so, it was finding the right level of spy thriller for us. We wanted to tell people you have a summer blockbuster, you have a post-apocalyptic movie, and you have a spy thriller. And those are the 3 movies that you're going to live in that tell a story. And by nature, some people are going to like some more than others.
I know, like, we did do pretty good. Winning 12 games, but like it feels like it would be hard to do as bad as that March-April in Pandemic of Season 2. That's what it feels like. I mean, was that the experience, and was that the intent?
I think so. I think we said like, oh wow, that was a little hard for people, was a dark middle chapter. We don't want a dark middle chapter. We want a game that's pretty easy to get in. Not easy. Competent group of players can get an adequate rating most of the time.
Okay.
But is that who you want to be, as an adequate rating people? And what, do you want to push for winning at the chance of losing? Like again, moral ambiguity, like what is personal victory for you? Who do you trust? So yeah, we said this shouldn't be as wide a cone and as hard as season 2. Season 2 is supposed to be Empire Strikes Back. Like nothing goes right in that movie, or Avengers Infinity War. From the very first scene in that, they are constantly one scene behind Thanos.
Right.
But by the time I get there, he's been there or he's done his thing, and they just never get their footing. But then you get to Endgame, and you've got, you got a more uplifting story. So it was about setting narrative expectations.
So it would be remiss of me to not mention the passports, right? I mean, that was so exciting. In terms of the three characters and having upgrades that are relevant to each individual character, and mechanism wise, how you put kind of extra actions into the system with these little action tokens to be able to kind of give player permission to flip between back. That's how it felt in terms of the extra action economy, to give us permission to flip back and forth between characters. Was that the intent?
I think that helped to some extent. Yeah, I mean, we went back and forth on how much it would cost to flip between your identities. If you do it too frequently, if you make it too seamless, too liquid, it just becomes this analysis paralysis problem, because you've got all these different identities you can be at any given time, even between actions. It's too much. So we knew we needed to make it an action. The action tokens just provide more flexibility in the system. We needed them for a number of different things. I don't think it was really for the passports, though. I think it was for something else.
No, what we tended to do is we always say, well, what's something that exists in Pandemic, and can we tweak it? Like, for example, in season 2, it's like, why does there only have to be one instance of a city in the infection deck? Why can't there be 3 Jacksonvilles? And why can't you take cards out of the draw pile? The player cards.
Player cards.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
So in this, we're like, well, is there a currency where you can get extra actions? And what does that do? Is that a power fantasy? If you can do 8 things on a turn, is that great, or does it break it? And do people spread them out? Do they hoard them? Do they give them to one person for one key turn? And we just watched. It's like a new toy for people to play with, and we thought it worked.
Mm-hmm. I loved it. It was a different way to end it, because as you mentioned Star Wars a lot. Like, Star Wars ends on huge explosions and everything is great, and all Return of the Jedi. This doesn't do that. Like, it just kind of like gives you that kind of simmer boil, and then there's a satisfying ending. But it was more like the ending of like, wow, we played 3 legacy games, as opposed to this big movie climax.
So so Jason wants more Ewoks.
More Ewoks. Yeah. On it, yeah.
I'm sure if we give Z-Man time, we'll get Pandemic Star Wars in the next Taudos.
Yeah, we'll go back. We'll put some CGI in it. We just wanted. We actually came up with the ending for season 0 in the middle of season 2, and we liked it narratively. Mm-hmm. We did the big explosions. So, and season 2 ends with a dramatic chase. Right. And so we're like, this, what can we do differently? Well, our main goal when we're talking is, they saw that. Mm-hmm. What haven't they seen?
Yeah. Okay. So, I think that, again, we're trying to talk around spoilers with season 0. We're going to keep that spoiler light, but, I think you have a sense of what 0 did differently, and, what you're going to get. Like, you hear some reviews, how many games of Pandemic are you going to play? They do feel really different. So, and there was intention put into making each experience different. So no more, right? Pandemic Legacy, the chapter is closed, right? We're good.
I don't think between the two of us, we haven't had one idea of what to do next in this series in the 2 years since we finished. Every time someone brings it up, we're like, we're discovering as we went, we're like, we've done that. Yeah. Like, man, if we do one more, we're just going to be repeating ourselves, and trilogies are hard. Mm-hmm. And I feel really good about what we did as a trilogy. And I think anything after that is just going to become derivative.
Right. Anything left on the cutting room floor that might have been worked into, or is the cupboard really bare for that?
I can't think of anything that I would consider an itch that I wanted to scratch. I think we used most of the stuff in the cupboard.
Yeah, I mean, there's something we cut from season 1 that ended up in season 0, in a very different way. But it wasn't like, oh, we got to get this back somehow. It's more like we were thinking of a solution and we had a mechanism. We're like, wait, this is a thing we tried to do 4 years ago. Like, oh yeah, it wasn't like an itch to do it. It's just we had a similar problem and we found a better way to solve it. So,
right. Pandemic Legacy chapter is closed. On to other things. So as we wrap
other things,
as we wrap up the podcast, pitch what's coming. So Rob, you have Return to Dark Tower is coming.
Return to Dark Tower was a big Kickstarter that Restoration Games did in 2020. That is on ships or just getting on. It's hard to get a ship these days. It's a big, complicated game. So things are happening, and those will be in people's hands November-ish, depending on freight and logistics. But we have Thunder Road Vendetta as our next Kickstarter, and that will be going October. I should have this memorized, October 12th. So if you like driving cars and slamming into cars and shooting people and otherwise indulging in just wonderful, chaotic nonsense, check that out.
Competitive or cooperative?
Oh, competitive. Yeah.
Am I the Fast and Furious team racing against something, or am I just running into
we are looking at maybe putting 2v2 team play in the base rules, someone suggests, but we haven't even particularly played it. But no, this is just, you get 3 cars and there's expansions. You can play a big rig or 5 motorcycles, and you can be on fire, and there's ramps and stuff all in expansion. So it's like a 45-minute game, and it's based on a 1986 game, Thunder Road. Yeah.
Look out for that one. Matt, you have a very exciting project coming. And so please share.
Yeah, well, I've been working on a game about the climate crisis. So another cooperative game instead of pandemics this time, moving on to the next crisis du jour. And I've been working on it for, I think, about 18, 19 months with a co-designer named Matteo Menapes out of London. So we met and hit it off and been working on it ever since. This is the first game I've done that's really been deeply embedded with the research. So I've done a lot of reading on it. We're working very closely with other experts in the field, and actually going up to San Francisco a week from today to meet with some diplomats as part of COP to share the game with them and some
Nice.
Youth who are involved in the climate movement. So it's been really interesting, quite a journey going through the despair of learning about all of it to kind of moving into the solutions.
It's called Daybreak.
It's called Daybreak, yeah, and it's we're expecting to release it next year.
Is it a Kickstarter or?
It'll likely be a Kickstarter. It's through CMYK,
okay,
who did Monikers and Wavelength. So this is a bit of a different game for them, but they're both really passionate about the topics. It's been wonderful to work with them on the game.
I played the prototype. It's annoyingly good. I know he spent a ton of time in it, and I was like, let's sit down and play this. I'm like, oh, that's really good, Matt.
Thanks.
I may never design something like this.
Oh my God, come on.
Well, I am so, I mean, I'm soaking in jealousy and envy and all the terrible emotions of these amazing people that have delivered so much fun to my table. And I know that there will be, lots and lots of fun. Dark Tower and Daybreak are certainly high on my list. And there's going to be a lot of different projects to go. I am very blessed. And seriously, I am very blessed that you're able to make some time. So Rob Daviau, Matt Leacock, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for having us.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.